Red lights filled the cabin before I even heard the alarm. My hands froze on the control panel of the cargo ship Horizon as 3 alien warships dropped out of warp directly in front of us, blocking every path forward. My co-pilot, Lucy Bennett, grabbed my arm and pointed at the scanner. Weapons were charging, not warning shots. Real weapons, aimed at an unarmed human transport carrying medical supplies to a colony that badly needed them. A voice crackled through our comms, cold and flat, speaking in the clipped tone the Council patrols always used with humans. Unregistered vessel, you are in violation of the Silence Accords. Power down your engines and prepare for boarding. I answered as calmly as I could, though my heart was slamming against my ribs. This is Civilian Transport Horizon. We are carrying medicine, not weapons. Check our manifest. Human vessels do not question Council orders. Power down. That was the world I grew up in, a world where a supply ship carrying bandages and antibiotics could be treated like an invading battle fleet, simply because the crew was human. I powered down the engines, because refusing meant destruction, and I had seen what happened to ships that refused. They boarded us like we were criminals. 4 armored officers from a species called the Dravane walked through our cargo hold, scanning crates of medicine with the same suspicion they might use on a bomb. One of them picked up a box of vaccines, turned it over in clawed fingers, and set it down without a word of apology when it turned out to be exactly what our manifest said. No apology ever came. There never was one, not for us. This was life under the Silence Accords, the agreement humanity never actually agreed to. 60 years earlier, when Earth first made contact with the wider galaxy, the Council did not welcome us as a new voice among many. They studied us, judged us, and decided we were dangerous, too aggressive, too unpredictable, a species that had fought 2 world wars and dozens of smaller ones within a single century was, in their eyes, a threat waiting to happen. So they placed us under quarantine. No advanced propulsion technology, no modern weapons research, no seat at the Council table, just enough trade to keep us dependent, and enough surveillance to keep us controlled. They called it protection. Protection for the galaxy, from us. I was born into that cage, and so was everyone I loved. My mother used to tell me stories about the old dream of space travel, back before first contact, when humans believed the stars were something we would reach on our own terms. Instead, we reached them and found a locked door with someone else holding the key. The Dravane officer finished his inspection and looked at me the way you might look at a dog that had not yet bitten anyone, but might. You may proceed. Report any deviation from your registered flight path immediately. Understood, I said, because there was nothing else to say. They left as quickly as they had come, and Lucy exhaled beside me like she had been holding her breath the entire time. One day, she muttered, someone is going to stop saying understood. I did not answer her. I just restarted the engines and set our course back toward the colony, my hands still shaking slightly from adrenaline that had nowhere to go. That colony was called Aldergrove, a small human settlement on the edge of Council space, home to about 6,000 people who had gone there for one simple reason: elbow room. Earth was crowded, and Aldergrove offered farmland, clean air, and a chance to build something new, even under quarantine restrictions. I had family there. My uncle Simon Wade ran the water processing station on the north side of the settlement, and I always looked forward to seeing him when supply runs brought me that way. We reached Aldergrove 2 days later. From orbit, the colony looked peaceful, a scattering of lights across a green valley, domes glowing faintly in the dark. I remember thinking it looked like home, in a way nowhere else in the galaxy ever had for me since leaving Earth. I did not know it would be the last time I saw it whole. 3 weeks after that delivery, while I was back on a transport route on the far side of Council space, I received a message that changed everything. It came through an emergency channel, garbled and cutting in and out, from Lucy, who had stayed behind at Aldergrove to help with a second delivery. Ethan, her voice broke through static. There's been an accident at the mining relay. The whole northern section is gone. They're saying it was equipment failure, But Ethan, I saw the debris pattern before they cut our sensors. That was no accident. The official council report came out 2 days later. A processing station malfunction, they said, an unfortunate industrial accident involving unstable mining equipment near a densely populated area. 3,200 human colonists were listed as casualties. My Uncle Simon was one of them. I read that report so many times I could recite it word for word, and every single time, something about it felt wrong. Mining equipment did not create the kind of blast pattern Lucy had described. She was not an engineer, but she had spent enough years around cargo ships and station operations to know controlled damage when she saw it. She told me later that the destruction spread outward from a single point with a symmetry that no accidental explosion could produce. I brought her account to the local council liaison office, hoping someone would listen. The officer who took my statement, a tall reptilian being from a species called the CoreHFY, listened politely enough, wrote a few notes, and then closed the folder in front of him. "Your concerns will be noted in the official file," he said. "However, the investigation has already been completed and closed. Industrial accidents of this scale are tragic, but not uncommon on frontier colonies with limited infrastructure oversight." Limited infrastructure, I repeated, feeling something cold settle in my chest. "You mean the infrastructure you approved, the infrastructure your own inspectors certified 6 months ago? I understand this is a difficult time for your people," he said, in a tone that suggested he understood nothing at all. "The council extends its sympathies." Sympathies. That was the word they used, over and over, in every statement that followed. Sympathies for the dead, sympathies for the grieving, sympathies that came wrapped in official letterhead and never once came with an actual answer. No independent investigation, no access to the sensor logs from council patrol ships that had been in the area at the time, no explanation for why the northern section of Aldergrove, the section closest to a disputed resource claim that a rival faction had wanted for years, was the only part of the colony destroyed. I flew back to Earth after that, not because I wanted to give up, but because I needed to understand what our own people were doing about it. What I found surprised me. Officially, our government issued a formal protest, requesting a full inquiry. It went nowhere, buried under procedural delays that the council was very good at creating whenever it suited them. But unofficially, something else was happening. Quiet conversations were taking place in rooms I was not supposed to know about, between people who had stopped believing that formal protests would ever be enough. I did not know it yet, sitting in that liaison office with my uncle's name printed on a casualty list, but the destruction of Aldergrove was not going to be forgotten. It was going to be remembered, studied, and answered, in a way the council never expected from a species they had spent 60 years underestimating. I did not sleep well for months after that. Every night I saw the same image in my mind, the green valley from orbit, the scattered lights, the quiet peace of a place that no longer existed the way I remembered it. Grief has a way of settling into your bones and staying there, but grief was not the only thing settling into mine. Something harder was growing alongside it, something that did not want sympathies anymore. It wanted the truth, and if the truth would not be given freely, it wanted the power to take it. I did not know yet how far that feeling would carry me, or how many others across Earth were feeling exactly the same thing at exactly the same time. But looking back now, from where I stand today, I can say this much with total certainty. The moment the council closed that file on Aldergrove without a real answer, they did not close a chapter, they opened one, and they had no idea what was coming next. 6 months after my uncle's name was added to a list nobody outside our species seemed to care about, I received a message with no sender name attached, only a single line of text and a set of coordinates on Earth. It read, quite simply, "If you want answers, come find them yourself." I stared at that message for a long time before I decided to go. I told Lucy where I was headed, half expecting her to talk me out of it. Instead, she asked when we were leaving, because wherever this led, she was not about to let me walk into it alone. That decision, more than any other, was the beginning of everything that followed. Neither of us understood yet just how deep the preparations already ran, or how many people across the world had already chosen the same path we were about to take. All we knew was that the sympathies were over, and something new was starting to take shape in the quiet places the Council never bothered to watch. The coordinates led me to an old aircraft hangar outside a small town in Nevada, the kind of place that had been abandoned on every public map for at least a decade. Lucy and I drove through the night to get there, and when we arrived, the building looked exactly as empty as it was supposed to. It was only when a side door opened, without anyone visibly operating it, that I understood the emptiness was the entire point. Inside, the hangar had been hollowed out and rebuilt from the ground up. Rows of workstations lined the walls, staffed by engineers, physicists, and former military officers, all moving with the quiet urgency of people who knew exactly what they were doing and exactly how much time they did not have. A woman in a gray jacket approached us before we had taken 10 steps inside. She introduced herself as Grace Whitfield, and she did not waste time on pleasantries. "You're Ethan Cole," she said, "nephew of Simon Wade. You reported the Aldergrove incident to the CoreHFY liaison office and got nowhere. How do you know that?" "Because we've been tracking every family who tried to get answers and got stonewalled instead. You're not the first, and you won't be the last." She studied me for a moment, then glanced at Lucy. "And you're the one who saw the debris pattern. That report you never got to file officially, we have it." Every word. I felt something between relief and anger rise in my chest. Relief, because someone was finally listening. Anger, because it meant Lucy's testimony had been quietly collected and preserved by people who never told either of us they were doing it. "What is this place?" I asked. Grace led us through the hangar as she answered. "This is one of 11 sites like it, spread across 6 continents. We call the whole effort the Foundry Project. It started 12 years ago, right after the Council rejected our second petition for full membership. A group of scientists and former officers decided that, if we were never going to be allowed to build our way up through legal channels, we would build our way up anyway, quietly, until we had no choice but to be taken seriously." She stopped in front of a wide viewing window that looked down into a lower level of the hangar, and what I saw through that glass took my breath away. Suspended in a magnetic cradle sat the skeleton of a ship unlike anything Earth had ever produced, its hull lined with a lattice of dark metal that seemed to drink in the overhead lights rather than reflect them. "That's a prototype interceptor," Grace said. "Built using propulsion theory we were never supposed to have access to. 8 years ago, a salvage crew recovered a damaged Council patrol vessel in an asteroid field outside monitored space, a vessel the Council never officially reported losing. We didn't just study the wreckage. We rebuilt the ideas behind it from nothing, because the Council never imagined humans could reverse engineer their technology without their approval." I stared at that ship for a long moment, trying to reconcile the vast, secret effort in front of me with the world I thought I understood the day before. Why show me this? Why show either of us? "Because knowledge like this is useless without people willing to use it for the right reasons," Grace said. "We are not building an army to conquer anyone. We are building the capability to finally stand as equals and to protect our people the way the Council has refused to. We need engineers, pilots, negotiators, people who understand alien systems and alien politics. Lucy has spent years around cargo logistics and station operations. You have spent years flying supply routes through monitored space and dealing directly with Council patrols. Both of those skills are exactly what we need." That night, Lucy and I sat in a small briefing room while Grace laid out exactly what the Foundry Project had accomplished and exactly what it still needed. Independent power generation capable of running Council-grade shielding. Weapons systems designed purely for disabling rather than destroying, built by engineers who insisted from day one that humanity would not become the very thing it was fighting against. A growing network of human observers embedded quietly across Council space, gathering information the Council never imagined we were capable of collecting. What struck me most was not the technology, it was the discipline behind it. Every decision in that room was debated carefully, weighed against the question of what kind of species humanity wanted to become once it finally stepped out from under the Silence Accords. A younger engineer named Henry Cross argued passionately that we should strike first, before the Council or any of its member species realized how far we had come. An older officer named Marcus Doyle argued just as passionately that striking first would prove every accusation the Council had ever made about us being dangerous and unpredictable. I found myself agreeing more with Marcus than with Henry, though I understood Henry's anger completely. I had buried an uncle because of Council indifference. I understood the desire to make someone pay quickly. But making someone pay and proving ourselves worthy of respect were not always the same goal, and I did not want to trade one kind of injustice for another. Over the following months, I became part of the effort in ways I never expected. My knowledge of Council patrol patterns, gathered from years of supply runs, helped the project's analysts map gaps in surveillance coverage across 3 different sectors. Lucy's understanding of station logistics helped design a distribution network capable of moving equipment and personnel without drawing attention. We were no longer just cargo pilots. We had become part of something far larger than either of us had imagined possible. I learned things during that time that reshaped everything I believed about our place in the galaxy. The Council was not one unified voice, as their public statements always implied. It was a fragile alliance of species with competing interests, held together mostly by shared fear of instability and shared benefit from controlling smaller, newer civilizations like ours. Several Council member species had grown wealthy from resource agreements forced upon quarantined worlds, agreements those worlds had never truly consented to. Earth's quarantine was not really about protecting the galaxy from human aggression. It was about protecting a system that profited from keeping humanity exactly where it was. Grace showed me records the Foundry Project had gathered over the years, records suggesting the Dravane, the same species that had inspected our cargo ship with such suspicion, held significant financial interests in mineral rights near several human colonies, including a disputed claim near the northern section of Aldergrove. I read that report standing in the same viewing room where I had first seen the Interceptor prototype, and for the first time since my uncle's death, the pieces of a puzzle I had been staring at for months finally began forming a picture I could recognize. It did not prove the Aldergrove incident was deliberate, not yet, but it gave me a reason powerful enough to keep working, day after day, alongside people who had sacrificed careers, relationships, and years of their lives to build something the galaxy had told humanity it was never allowed to have. 14 months after I first walked into that hangar, the breakthrough came. I remember the exact moment because the entire facility went quiet, then erupted into something between disbelief and celebration. A team led by a physicist named Elena Voss had finally solved the last barrier standing between the Foundry Project and true independent faster-than-light travel, a barrier that had nothing to do with power output and everything to do with a mathematical model the Council had guarded jealously for centuries. Elena stood in front of the assembled engineers that evening, exhausted but glowing with something like disbelief at her own success. "We are no longer dependent on their technology," she said. "Every ship we build from this point forward will move on principles we discovered ourselves, principles they cannot restrict, monitor, or take away." I watched Grace Whitfield's face during that announcement, and for the first time since I had met her, I saw something close to hope rather than grim determination. She turned to the room and said words I have never forgotten. "Today, we stopped being a quarantined species waiting for permission. Today, we became a civilization capable of choosing our own future." I wanted to feel nothing but triumph in that moment, and part of me did. But another part of me, quieter and more cautious, understood exactly what this breakthrough meant. We now had the ability to reach beyond the borders the Council had drawn around us. We now had the ability to answer force with force, if it ever came to that. The only question left was whether we would ever be given a reason to use it, and deep down, after everything I had already seen, I suspected that reason was closer than any of us wanted to admit. I did not know then just how soon that suspicion would be confirmed, or how completely the choices made in that hangar would determine the shape of everything still to come. The alarm woke me at 3 in the morning, and I knew before I even reached the command center that something terrible had happened. Grace Whitfield met me at the door, her face pale under the corridor lights, a datapad clutched tightly in her hand. "Belmont Colony," she said, before I could ask. "It's under attack right now." Belmont was a human settlement of nearly 9,000 people, built into the sheltered valleys of a moon on the far edge of monitored space. I had flown supply routes near it a dozen times. Families lived there, schools, a small hospital that had only just finished construction the year before. I felt my stomach drop as Grace pulled up the live sensor feed on the main screen. 3 unmarked warships hung in orbit above Belmont, their weapons locked onto the colony's shield generators. These were not Council patrol vessels. Analysis quickly identified them as belonging to a private security contractor working for the Dravane Mining Consortium, the same consortium whose disputed claim sat near what used to be Aldergrove. "They're testing us," Marcus Doyle said grimly, arriving at the console beside me. "They think we're still helpless. They think Aldergrove taught us nothing except how to write angry letters that go nowhere." On the screen, Belmont's shield generator flickered under sustained fire. I watched colonists scrambling toward underground shelters in grainy sensor footage, watched emergency broadcasts cutting in and out as the attacking ships jammed local communications. My hands curled into fists at my sides. "We have 3 interceptors combat ready," Elena Voss said from across the room, her voice tight with urgency. "They're stationed at Site 9, 4 hours out at standard speed, 90 minutes at full capability with the new drive systems." Grace looked at Marcus, then at me, then back at the screen where Belmont's shields were failing in real time. 90 minutes might not be fast enough to prevent casualties, but it is fast enough to prevent a massacre. Authorized deployment, defensive engagement only. Disable, do not destroy, unless there is no other option. I volunteered to fly the lead interceptor before I had fully decided to. Marcus argued I had less combat simulation experience than trained pilots waiting in reserve, and he was right, but I also had something they did not. I had flown near Belmont enough times to know its terrain, its approach vectors, the blind spots in any orbital defense a hostile force might set up. In the end, Grace made the call, pairing me with a seasoned pilot named Nora Blake, who had spent 3 years training in the simulator, running scenarios exactly like this one. The 90-minute flight felt like both an eternity and no time at all. Nora flew with a calm precision that steadied my nerves, running through disabling protocols with me the entire way, drilling me on the exact frequencies and pressure points that would knock out an enemy ship's weapons without destroying it outright. "We are not here for revenge," she reminded me more than once. "We are here to stop this, and to prove we can stop it without becoming what they already think we are." When we dropped out of transit above Belmont, the scene below us was worse than the sensor feed had shown. The colony's main shield generator had failed completely, and one of the attacking ships was moving into position for what looked like a direct strike on the underground shelters where colonists had taken refuge. I felt something cold and clear settle over me, the kind of focus I had never experienced before that moment. Nora took the lead ship head-on, using a maneuver the Foundry engineers had spent months perfecting, a targeted energy pulse designed to overload an enemy vessel's weapons systems without breaching its hull. It worked exactly as intended. The lead ship's weapons array went dark, and its crew, stunned by an attack they never expected from a supposedly primitive species, broke formation in confusion. I engaged the second ship using the same technique, my hands steadier than I expected, given how hard my heart was pounding. The third ship attempted to retreat, but our third interceptor, piloted by a young officer named Ethan, had trained alongside during preparation, cut off its escape route, and disabled its engines before it could reach transit range. Within 11 minutes, all 3 attacking vessels were disabled, drifting powerless above a colony that had come within moments of catastrophe. Not a single attacking crew member was killed. Every one of them survived, disarmed and helpless, forced to watch as human rescue teams that had followed close behind us worked to stabilize Belmont's damaged shelters and treat the colonists injured in the initial assault. We recovered the attacking ship's command logs before Council authorities arrived to take custody of the crews, and those logs told us everything we needed to know. The order to strike Belmont had come directly from Dravain Consortium leadership, framed internally as a message to any human settlement that might resist future resource negotiations. It was never about instability or danger. It was about profit, protected for decades by a quarantine that kept humanity too weak to object. I insisted on being present when the evidence was formally submitted to the Council, not through the usual liaison channels that had failed my uncle so completely, but through a direct emergency petition that the Foundry Project had been quietly preparing the legal groundwork for over the past year. Grace warned me that the Council rarely granted direct hearings to unrepresented species, but our evidence, combined with the undeniable fact that humanity had somehow acquired advanced independent technology capable of disabling armed warships without casualties, was enough to force their hand. The council chamber was larger and colder than I had imagined, a vast circular room ringed by representatives from dozens of species, each seated according to a strict hierarchy that placed humanity, as an unrepresented quarantined species, at the very bottom tier, speaking only when granted permission. I stood at a small podium at the center of that hierarchy, Grace and Marcus beside me, and delivered the evidence we had gathered, my voice echoing across a room full of beings who had spent 60 years deciding what humanity was allowed to be. I laid out the timeline plainly: the disputed mining claim near Aldergrove, the destruction of the colony's northern section in a blast pattern inconsistent with any accidental industrial failure, the financial records connecting Dravain Consortium leadership to that claim, the attack on Belmont, ordered by the same consortium, intended as a message to any human settlement that resisted their demands. I requested a full independent investigation into both incidents, along with formal recognition that humanity possessed the right to defend its own colonies, without waiting for council approval that had never once arrived in time. A representative from the CoreHFY delegation, the same species whose liaison office had dismissed my original report, rose to respond. His tone was measured, almost gentle, the kind of tone reserved for explaining something slowly to someone who was not expected to understand it. The Council appreciates the concerns raised. However, matters of interspecies commerce and resource negotiation fall outside the scope of this body's direct authority. We recommend the human delegation pursue arbitration through appropriate consortium channels. There is no appropriate channel, I said, and I did not raise my voice, though everything in me wanted to. There was no appropriate channel when my uncle died at Aldergrove. There was no appropriate channel while Belmont's shields were failing 3 days ago. Every channel your council has offered us for 60 years has led to the same closed door and the same word: sympathies. We are done accepting sympathies in place of accountability. A long silence followed, broken finally by a representative I had not expected to speak at all, an elder statesman from a smaller species called the Illyri, one of the few delegations that had occasionally voted in favor of expanding human trade rights over the years. The human delegate raises evidence that deserves genuine review, not procedural dismissal, she said. I move that this council formally investigate both incidents with full transparency to the human government. The vote that followed was close, closer than I expected given the weight of what we had presented, but it failed. 14 delegations in favor, 17 opposed, 5 abstaining, including, notably, the Dravain delegation itself, whose consortium stood accused, casting one of the deciding votes against an investigation into their own conduct. I stood at that podium as the vote total appeared on the chamber's central display, and something inside me went very still and very clear. I understood, in that moment, that the Council was never going to give humanity justice through its own processes, because doing so would mean admitting that a system built to keep newer species dependent and profitable was fundamentally broken. They would rather protect that system than protect the people living under it. Before I stepped away from the podium, I said one final thing, and I chose every word carefully, because I knew it would be recorded and replayed across every council world within hours. For 60 years, you have called us unstable and dangerous, and used that judgment to justify keeping us weak. You called us a threat waiting to happen, while your own consortiums murdered our people for mineral rights, and called it an accident. Today you had the chance to prove that judgment wrong, to prove this council stands for something more than protecting whoever profits most from the current arrangement. You chose otherwise. Humanity has spent 60 years asking for the truth through every channel you allowed us. We will not spend a 61st year asking again. I walked out of that chamber with Grace and Marcus beside me, the weight of 17 dismissive votes settling over all three of us like a physical thing. Nobody spoke on the transport ride back to our ship. There was nothing left to say that words could accomplish anymore. The council had been given every opportunity to choose accountability, and instead, safely insulated behind procedure and profit, they had chosen silence. I thought about my Uncle Simon, about the colonists at Belmont who had come within minutes of sharing his fate, about the disabled crews we had spared even after everything they had done, proof that we were capable of restraint, even when restraint had never once been offered to us in return. I thought about 60 years of quarantine, sympathy statements, and closed investigation files, all of it built on the assumption that humanity would simply keep absorbing injustice indefinitely, grateful for whatever scraps of consideration the council occasionally offered. That assumption ended the moment those 17 votes appeared on the display. I did not know exactly what came next, not the details, not the timeline, but I understood the shape of it clearly enough. Humanity had asked, humanity had proven, humanity had been refused, formally, on the record, by a body that had every piece of evidence needed to act and chose not to. What followed was not going to be an act of blind anger. Grace, Marcus, Elena, and everyone who had spent 12 years building the Foundry project in secret had made certain of that from the very beginning. But it was also not going to wait for permission that would never come. As our ship broke orbit and turned back toward Earth, I looked out at the vast, dark spread of Council space, home to hundreds of species who had never once had to fight for the simple right to be believed, and I understood that humanity's answer was already in motion, quiet and precise, and utterly unstoppable. 3 weeks after the vote, I stood in the command center at Site 9, watching the largest gathering of human ships ever assembled move into formation on the main display. 42 vessels, built from technology the Council never believed we could develop, crewed by pilots and officers who had trained in secret for over a decade for exactly this moment. I was assigned to the command deck of our lead ship, the Vanguard, alongside Grace Whitfield and Admiral Owen Blackwood, a former naval officer who had spent the last 8 years shaping the Foundry project's scattered volunteers into a coordinated fleet. Our target was not the Council itself. Grace had been clear about that from the very first planning session. Attacking the Council directly would prove every fear they had ever expressed about humanity, and it would drag dozens of uninvolved species into a conflict that served no one. Instead, our target was narrow and specific: the Dravane Consortium's primary orbital shipyard and command facility, the operational heart of the organization responsible for Aldergrove and Belmont, protected until now by the assumption that no one, least of all humanity, would ever dare strike back. "Remember why we built this fleet," Admiral Blackwood said to the assembled crew over the fleet-wide channel before we entered transit. "We are not here to conquer. We are not here for slaughter. We are here to make it impossible for anyone in this galaxy to ever again treat human lives as an acceptable cost of doing business, disable their capability, protect their people, prove exactly what kind of species we chose to become, even after everything done to us." I felt the familiar cold clarity settle over me again as our ship dropped out of transit above the Dravane shipyard, the same clarity I had felt above Belmont, except now it was shared across 42 ships instead of 3. The shipyard's defense grid activated within seconds, alarms flooding every channel, but the consortium's forces were arranged for routine security, never for an assault from a species they had spent 60 years dismissing as harmless. Our first wave targeted the shipyard's defense platforms using the same disabling technology that had worked at Belmont, precise energy pulses designed to overload weapons systems rather than destroy the ships carrying them. Nora Blake, flying beside me as she had above Belmont, took out 2 defense platforms in the opening minute, her voice calm and steady, over comms, even as return fire lit up the space around her ship. Their response pattern is exactly what our simulations predicted, Elena Voss reported from the analysis station aboard the Vanguard. They're reacting to individual threats instead of coordinating a unified defense. They still don't understand what they're facing. That was the truth at the center of everything that followed. The consortium's forces had spent generations assuming technological superiority guaranteed victory, never training for an opponent who understood their systems as intimately as we did, because we had built our own systems by studying theirs from the ground up. Where their ships moved in rigid, predictable patrol formations, ours adapted in real time, sharing targeting data instantly across the entire fleet, through communication networks the Foundry engineers had spent years perfecting specifically for this kind of coordinated engagement. I flew my interceptor through the chaos of the opening engagement, disabling a mid-sized escort vessel's engines before it could escape into transit range, watching its crew scramble toward emergency pods as their ship went dark and drifted harmlessly out of the fight. Every disabled crew we encountered was given the same treatment, escape opportunities preserved, life support systems left intact, no lethal force used except in the rare instances where an enemy vessel refused to stand down and continued firing on our rescue teams working to secure Belmont's earlier attackers, who Council custody had somehow already quietly released back into consortium service. 40 minutes into the engagement, the Dravane shipyard's command facility attempted to launch its most heavily armed vessels, a reserve force clearly meant to be a last line of defense against exactly this kind of assault. Admiral Blackwood had anticipated the possibility and held 4 of our fastest interceptors in reserve specifically to counter it. I watched on the tactical display as those 4 ships intercepted the reserve force before it could clear the shipyard's own defensive perimeter, disabling 3 of the 5 vessels within minutes and forcing the remaining 2 into a retreat that took them straight into a containment field Elena's team had quietly deployed hours earlier, anticipating exactly this maneuver. "They're requesting communication," Grace said suddenly, looking up from her console. "Consortium Command wants to talk." Admiral Blackwood nodded, and the channel opened across the bridge. A Dravane officer's voice came through, tight with barely controlled fury, and something underneath it that sounded unmistakably like fear. "This is an act of war against a protected consortium under Council jurisdiction. You will cease this assault immediately." I stepped forward before Blackwood could answer, because I wanted the consortium to hear this directly from someone who had stood in their liaison office and been told to accept sympathies instead of answers. "This is not an act of war," I said. "This is an act of accountability, something your consortium has avoided for 60 years by hiding behind Council protection you never deserved. We are not attacking your people. We are ending your ability to order attacks on ours. Stand down your remaining defenses and no further ships will be engaged." There was a long pause before the officer responded, his voice quieter now, stripped of its earlier certainty. "You would risk full Council retaliation for this." "We already tried the Council," I said. 17 votes told us exactly how much protection your victims could expect. We are done waiting for permission to defend our own people." The consortium's remaining forces stood down within the hour, their command facility surrounded, and their shipyard's production capability disabled beyond any quick repair. Not one enemy combatant had been killed during the entire engagement, a fact Elena's team confirmed through careful monitoring of every disabled vessel's life support telemetry throughout the fight. Every single crew member who surrendered was alive, and every human pilot who had flown into that engagement returned home as well, a result that felt almost impossible given the scale of what we had just done. We recovered the shipyard's complete internal records before withdrawing, records that confirmed everything our earlier evidence had only suggested. detailed operational logs authorizing the Aldergrove strike, internal communications celebrating the destruction as a successful message to human colonists resisting resource claims, financial documentation showing payments to at least 2 council delegations in exchange for votes protecting the consortium from investigation. It was all there, meticulously documented by an organization that had never once imagined humanity would be capable of reaching far enough to expose it. Grace transmitted the complete record to every council delegation simultaneously, along with footage of the engagement itself, footage showing precisely disabled ships, preserved lives, and a restraint that stood in stark contrast to everything the council had spent 60 years assuming about our species. The transmission included a single message from Admiral Blackwood, brief and direct. Humanity did not choose this path. It was forced upon us by a system that valued profit over accountability and procedure over justice. We have shown you exactly what we are capable of, and exactly what we chose not to do with that capability. The question now is what the Council chooses to do with the truth we have given you. The journey back to Earth felt different from the flight home after the failed Council vote. There was no triumphant celebration aboard the Vanguard, no sense of victory in the way I had once imagined revenge might feel. Instead, there was a quiet, heavy sense of having crossed a threshold that could never be uncrossed, of having become, finally and undeniably, a civilization capable of defending itself, whether the rest of the galaxy approved or not. I stood at the observation window near the end of that journey, watching the stars shift as we approached transit range for home, and Nora Blake joined me there, quiet for a long moment before speaking. "Do you think they'll finally listen now?" she asked. I thought about the 17 votes, about my uncle's name on a casualty list, about the colonists at Belmont who had come within minutes of sharing his fate, about a consortium's meticulous records proving exactly what kind of system humanity had been quarantined to protect. "I think," I said slowly, "we just made it impossible for them not to." She nodded, and neither of us said anything else for a long while, watching the stars together as the ship carried us home, carrying with us proof that the galaxy's judgment of humanity had been wrong from the very beginning, and evidence that could no longer be filed away, dismissed, or buried beneath careful diplomatic language ever again. 6 weeks after the Vanguard returned home, I stood once again at the podium inside the council chamber, and this time the room was not the same room I remembered from before. Every seat was filled. Delegations that had never once bothered attending a human petition hearing were present now, watching, waiting, their earlier certainty about our species visibly shaken by everything that had happened since the last time I stood in that circle. Grace Whitfield stood on one side of me, Admiral Blackwood on the other, and behind us, displayed across the chamber's central screen, sat the complete record we had recovered from the Dravane shipyard, the same record that had already been circulating through council networks for weeks, impossible to suppress, once transmitted simultaneously to every delegation at once. The CoreHFY representative, who had once dismissed my report with careful, condescending sympathy, did not speak first this time. Instead, the Illyri elder, who had voted in our favor during the previous hearing, rose immediately, her expression carrying none of the caution she had shown before. "This council owes the human delegation a formal accounting," she said, her voice carrying clearly across the chamber. "Evidence now confirmed through independent verification shows deliberate destruction of a human colony, a calculated attack on a second, and financial corruption reaching directly into votes cast within this very chamber. We failed this species not once but repeatedly, and we did so while claiming to protect the galaxy from a threat that never existed in the way we claimed." A murmur spread through the assembled delegations, and I felt Grace shift slightly beside me, the same careful stillness she always carried when something important was happening that needed to be witnessed rather than interrupted. The Dravane delegation's seat, I noticed, stood empty. Grace had told me on the way in that formal charges had already been filed against 3 senior consortium officials, and that 2 council delegations implicated in the corruption records were currently undergoing internal review that would likely end their participation in this body entirely. The system that had protected Aldergrove's true cause for months was collapsing under its own weight, exposed by evidence no amount of procedural delay could bury anymore. When it came time for me to speak, I did not bring anger into that chamber the way I once thought I would if this moment ever arrived. Instead, I brought something steadier, shaped by everything I had witnessed over the past year, from a hangar in Nevada to the skies above Belmont to the disabled shipyard that had once believed itself untouchable. For 60 years, this council called humanity unstable, I said. You quarantined us, restricted us, and told the galaxy we were a danger waiting to happen. When our people were killed, you offered sympathies instead of investigations. When we asked for justice through every channel you allowed, you gave us 17 votes, protecting the very consortium responsible. We were left with only one choice remaining, and we made it carefully, deliberately, disabling every threat we faced without taking a single life, even from those who had taken so many of ours. I paused, letting that fact settle across the chamber, because it mattered more than anything else I could say. That restraint was not weakness, it was proof. Proof that the instability you feared in us was never real, that what you actually feared was a species capable of matching your power without losing its principles in the process. We are not here today asking for forgiveness for defending our people. We are here to redefine the terms under which humanity exists within this galaxy, permanently. Admiral Blackwood stepped forward and outlined those terms clearly. Full recognition of humanity as an independent, sovereign civilization, free from the restrictions of the Silence Accords. A permanent seat on the Council, with full voting rights equal to any other member species, an independent oversight body with human representation, empowered to investigate any future incident involving human colonies without requiring Council approval first, and full transparency regarding any existing agreements between Council delegations and private consortiums operating near human territory. The debate that followed lasted nearly 6 hours, longer than any Council session I had ever heard of, but it felt different from the debate that had produced 17 votes against us. Delegation after delegation rose to speak, many of them acknowledging, some for the first time publicly, concerns about the consortium system that had quietly extracted wealth from newer species for generations under the protection of Council indifference. Humanity's situation, it became clear, was not unique. It was simply the first to be exposed so completely that it could no longer be ignored. When the final vote came, the result was nothing like the one before it. 41 delegations in favor of full recognition, 3 opposed, 2 abstaining. Grace squeezed my arm gently as the total appeared on the display, and for the first time in longer than I could remember, I allowed myself to feel something close to relief. The formal ceremony granting humanity's seat took place 3 months later in the same chamber, though it felt like an entirely different place by then. I stood beside Grace, Marcus Doyle, Elena Voss, and Admiral Blackwood as Earth's new ambassador, a woman named Nora Blake who had traded her pilot's seat for a diplomat's chair after everything we had been through together, formally accepted humanity's seat on the Council. I watched her take her place among representatives from dozens of species, no longer relegated to the lowest tier of a hierarchy that had never respected us, but seated as an equal among equals. I thought often, in the months that followed, about how easily this could have gone differently. If the Foundry project had chosen conquest instead of restraint, if Admiral Blackwood had ordered destruction instead of disabling strikes, if anger alone had shaped our response instead of 12 years of careful, disciplined preparation, humanity might have proven every fear the Council ever held about us. Instead, we proved something else entirely, something I don't think the galaxy expected from a species it had spent 60 years underestimating. I returned to Aldergrove eventually, or what remained of it, now rebuilt with full Council support and formal reparations from the dissolved Dravane Consortium. I stood in the section that had once been my Uncle Simon's water processing station, now a small memorial garden maintained by colonists who had rebuilt their lives from the wreckage of what happened there. I thought about him often during that visit, about how he never lived to see any of this, and about how much of what followed had grown directly from the quiet, stubborn refusal to accept an unanswered question about his death. Lucy Bennett joined the new independent oversight body as one of its founding investigators, using the same sharp attention to detail that had first noticed the impossible debris pattern at Aldergrove to ensure no future incident involving human colonies would ever again be quietly filed away and forgotten. Henry Cross, the young engineer who had once argued for striking first, became one of the Foundry Project's most vocal advocates for continued restraint, having seen firsthand how much more powerful disciplined strength proved to be than unchecked anger. I often think back to that first night in the Nevada hangar, standing beside Lucy in front of a viewing window looking down at a half-built interceptor, uncertain whether the path in front of us was the right one. I think about Grace Whitfield's words that night, about knowledge being useless without people willing to use it for the right reasons. I understand now, more clearly than I did then, exactly what she meant. Humanity did not become powerful by becoming what the Council always feared we might. We became powerful by refusing to become that, even when every reasonable justification existed to do otherwise. We disabled ships instead of destroying them. We exposed corruption instead of seeking vengeance. We demanded a seat at the table instead of tearing the table down entirely. And in doing so, we forced an entire galaxy to reckon with the uncomfortable truth that the species they had spent 60 years calling dangerous had, all along, possessed more restraint and more integrity than the system that claimed the right to judge us. The Council still meets in that same circular chamber today, and humanity's seat sits among the others now, permanent and undeniable. I visit occasionally, usually alongside Ambassador Blake, watching new debates unfold over new challenges the galaxy continues to face. The other delegations look at our representatives differently now, not with the old condescension, but with something closer to caution mixed with respect, the kind reserved for a civilization that proved itself capable of overwhelming strength and chose, deliberately, to wield it with restraint instead. I think about my uncle every time I take that seat beside Ambassador Blake, about a quiet water processing station in a green valley that no longer needs anyone's sympathy because it finally received something far more valuable. It received the truth, fought for and won, and carried forward by a species that refused, against every expectation stacked against it, to become anything less than exactly who it always chose to be. And every single time I look around that chamber now, filled with delegations who once thought they understood exactly what humanity was capable of, I know one thing with absolute certainty. They were wrong about us from the very beginning, and they will spend a very long time remembering exactly why.